Stepmom sued me for my inheritance, claiming my dad wasn't sound of mind. I countersued with recordings of her abusing him. The judge not only dismissed her case, but triggered an elder abuse investigation. She lost her nursing license and her freedom. So, my stepmom tried to steal my inheritance by claiming my dad had dementia. Turns out she didn't know I had months of audio recordings of her verbally abusing him. The judge didn't just throw out her case, she ended up losing her nursing license and catching felony charges. Let me tell you how this went down. I'm 28, and my dad passed away 6 months ago from pancreatic cancer. The whole thing was brutal to watch. Went from diagnosis to funeral in 8 months flat. But this story actually starts way before that, back when my dad first got sick, and his wife Linda showed her true colors. Quick backstory, my dad married Linda when I was 19. My mom died when I was 16 from a car accident. And honestly, I wasn't thrilled when dad started dating again 2 years later. But I was heading to college and figured he deserved to be happy. Linda seemed nice enough at first. She was a nurse at the hospital, seemed caring and put together. They dated for about a year before getting married. The wedding was small, nothing crazy. I gave her a chance because my dad was smiling again. For the first few years, things were actually okay. Linda was polite to me when I came home from college, though we were never close. She had this way of being friendly without actually being warm, you know what I mean? Like she was playing the role of stepmom without really feeling it. But whatever. She made my dad happy, and that was enough for me. I graduated, got a job as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company, and moved 2 hours away. I'd visit dad every couple months. We'd talk on the phone every week. Normal stuff. Then 3 years ago, my dad got diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. It was bad, but treatable. Dad was 61, still relatively young and otherwise healthy. He started chemo and radiation pretty much immediately. That's when I started visiting every weekend, staying from Friday night through Sunday afternoon. Wanted to be there for him, help out however I could. And that's when I started noticing things about Linda. At first, it was small stuff. I'd walk into the kitchen and catch her rolling her eyes when Dad asked for water. Or she'd sigh really loud when he needed help getting up from the couch. Dad was dealing with chemo. He was exhausted, nauseous, weak. Basic human decency would be helping your sick husband without making him feel like a burden. But Linda acted like his cancer was this massive inconvenience to her personal life. She'd complain to her friends on the phone about how she couldn't go to yoga because she had to babysit my dad. Babysit. That's what she called taking care of her husband who had cancer. I heard her say that multiple times, and every time it made my blood boil. Dad never said anything about it, though. He was always the keep the peace type, you know? Didn't like conflict. Plus, I think the cancer and chemo were taking so much out of him that he didn't have energy to deal with marital issues on top of everything else. I tried talking to Linda one weekend, asked her if everything was okay, if she needed help with anything. She gave me this fake smile and said everything was fine, she was just tired from work. She was still working full-time at the hospital during all this. I offered to help more, maybe hire a nurse to come during the day, but she insisted she had it under control. The thing is, Linda was a registered nurse. She'd been working in oncology for 15 years. She knew exactly what cancer patients needed, what the treatment was like, what kind of care Dad required, which made her behavior even more messed up because she knew better. As the months went on and Dad's treatment continued, Linda's attitude got worse. Way worse. She started saying things to him that weren't just impatient, they were mean. I'm talking stuff like telling him he was being dramatic when he was in pain, or that he needed to toughen up because other patients have it worse. One Sunday morning, I was in the guest room getting ready to drive home when I heard them in the bedroom next door. Dad was asking Linda to help him get to the bathroom because he was dizzy from the meds. And I heard her say, "You're not even trying. You just want me to wait on you hand and foot." My dad, this strong man, who'd worked in construction for 30 years, who'd raised me by himself after Mom died, who never asked anyone for anything, he apologized to her, said he was sorry for being difficult. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I started staying longer on weekends, sometimes taking Friday off work to get there earlier. I told my boss my dad had cancer and needed more support. My company was cool about it. Let me work remotely when I needed to. So, I'd be at Dad's house from Thursday night through Monday morning some weeks. And the more time I spent there, the more I saw how Linda really treated my dad when she thought nobody was paying attention. She'd forget to pick up his prescriptions, then act all surprised when he'd run out of pain medication. She'd make dinner for herself and not make him anything, saying she thought he wasn't hungry. When he did eat, she'd criticize him for not eating enough or eating too much. She controlled the TV remote and would refuse to change the channel even when Dad asked nicely to watch something else. It was this constant pattern of small cruelties that added up to something really ugly. She was deliberately making his life harder during the worst time of his life. About 18 months ago, Dad's cancer progressed to stage 4. The doctors said treatment options were limited now, mainly focused on keeping him comfortable and extending time where possible. Dad took the news hard, obviously. We both knew what stage 4 meant. Linda's response was to start disappearing more. She'd work longer shifts at the hospital, go out with friends multiple times a week, basically avoid being home as much as possible. Meanwhile, Dad was getting sicker. He needed more help with basic stuff, getting dressed, cooking meals, managing his medications. That's when I made the decision to move back home. I talked to my company about going full remote, and they said yes. Packed up my apartment, put my stuff in storage, and moved into my old childhood bedroom. Told Dad I wanted to be there for him, and honestly, I needed to keep an eye on Linda. Dad seemed relieved when I moved back, though he tried to act like it wasn't necessary. "You don't need to put your life on hold for me," he said, but I could see it in his eyes. He was grateful to have someone there who actually gave a damn. Living in the house full-time, I saw everything. Linda wasn't just neglectful anymore. She was verbally abusive. She'd mock Dad for being sick, make comments about how he was pathetic, tell him he was making himself sicker by being so negative. Once I heard her tell him that his first wife, my mom, would be ashamed of how weak he'd become. I confronted her that time, told her that was completely out of line. She acted all innocent, said I misheard her, that she was trying to motivate him to stay positive. Gaslighting at its finest. Dad, meanwhile, kept defending her. "She's under a lot of stress," he'd say. "Taking care of someone with cancer is hard." Even when she was being cruel to his face, he'd make excuses for her. It killed me to watch. That's when I started recording everything. I wasn't trying to be sneaky or manipulative. I just knew that if I ever needed to prove what was happening, nobody would believe me over Linda, the devoted nurse wife. She was good at putting on a show for other people, doctors, neighbors, her friends. Around them, she was the caring wife dealing with her husband's terrible illness. Only Dad and I saw the real Linda. I bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use. Kept it in my pocket pretty much all the time when I was home. I wasn't recording private conversations or trying to catch Dad in compromising positions. I was documenting abuse. There's a difference. And the things I caught on those recordings were worse than I even realized. Linda telling Dad that he was ruining her life and she wished he'd just die already. Linda screaming at him for spilling water because his hands were shaking from the medication. Linda refusing to help him to the bathroom, then mocking him when he had an accident. Linda telling him she only married him for financial security and couldn't wait until he was gone. Hours and hours of this stuff, spread out over 6 months. Every instance of abuse, every cruel comment, every time she neglected his basic needs. I kept everything organized by date, made transcripts of the worst parts, backed everything up to cloud storage. Part of me wanted to confront her with the recordings, make her listen to herself and realize how messed up she was being. But I knew that wouldn't change anything. People like Linda don't suddenly develop empathy when you show them proof of their behavior. They just get better at hiding it. I did try talking to Dad about it one more time. Told him straight up that Linda was abusing him and he didn't deserve to be treated that way. Offered to help him however he needed, whether that meant marriage counseling, separation, divorce, whatever. Just something to get him away from her toxicity. Dad got quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Son, I know what she's like. I'm not stupid." That surprised me. I thought he'd been in denial, making excuses because he didn't want to see the truth. But he knew. He'd known all along. "Then why do you stay?" I asked. "Because I'm dying," he said simply. "And I'm tired of fighting. Everything is a fight now. The cancer, the treatment, my own body. I don't have energy to fight her too. It's just easier to let her be angry and get through each day until this is over." That broke my heart more than anything else. My dad had basically given up on being treated with dignity because he was too exhausted from being sick. He'd accepted abuse as the price of not having to deal with the hassle of leaving his wife while dying of cancer. I told him I understood, even though I didn't really. But I made him promise me one thing, that he'd protect me in his will. Make sure Linda couldn't screw me over after he was gone. "Already done," he said. "Changed my will 3 months ago. Everything I have goes to you. The house, the life insurance, my retirement accounts, all of it. Linda gets nothing." "She's going to lose her mind," I said. "I know," Dad replied. "That's why I didn't tell her. And I'm not going to. She'll find out after I'm gone, and by then, it won't matter what she thinks." He also told me he'd been careful about documenting his mental state. He'd been seeing his oncologist, his primary care doctor, and a specialist every few weeks. All of them had noted in their records that he was mentally sharp, cognitively intact, making his own decisions about treatment and end-of-life care. Dad knew Linda would probably try to challenge the will, claim he wasn't in his right mind when he changed it. "I'm dying, but I'm not stupid," he said again, "and I'm not going to let her profit off treating me like garbage." My dad died on a Tuesday morning in March. I was there, holding his hand. Linda was at the hospital for her shift. She hadn't even called in to be there for his final hours. By the time I called to tell her he'd passed, he'd been gone for 3 hours. She cried on the phone, put on a good show at the funeral, played the grieving widow perfectly. People kept telling her how sorry they were, what a good wife she'd been, how lucky Dad was to have had her care for him at the end. I wanted to vomit every time someone said that. The will reading was 2 weeks after the funeral. Linda showed up in black, still playing the mourning widow role. The lawyer read through the preliminaries, then got to the actual distribution of assets. Everything to me. The house, the life insurance payout of $400,000, Dad's retirement accounts totaling another $200,000, his truck, his tools, everything. Linda got nothing. Not one single dollar. Her face went white, then red, then white again. She looked at the lawyer like he'd made a mistake. Like surely this couldn't be right. The lawyer just looked uncomfortable and kept reading. There was a section Dad had insisted on including that basically said Linda was excluded intentionally, that Dad was of sound mind when making this decision, and that this was his final will and testament without any coercion or undue influence. "This is wrong," Linda said, her voice shaking. "He wouldn't do this. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. Mr. Patterson was evaluated by 3 separate physicians in the months before his death," the lawyer said. All of them confirmed he was mentally competent. His oncologist, Dr. Reynolds, specifically noted his mental clarity in medical records as recently as 2 weeks before he passed. Linda stood up so fast her chair fell over. "He had brain fog from the medications. He was confused all the time. This isn't legal. I'm contesting this." And then she stormed out. I sat there feeling this weird mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Dad had protected me like he promised. Sadness because this was going to get messy, and I knew it. The lawyer looked at me and said, "She's absolutely going to challenge this. I hope you're prepared for that." "I am," I said, and I meant it. Linda filed her lawsuit 6 weeks later. The claim was exactly what we'd expected. Dad wasn't of sound mind when he changed his will. He was suffering from cognitive decline due to cancer and medications. He was unduly influenced by me. The will should be thrown out and his estate should go to her as the surviving spouse. Her lawyer painted me as this manipulative son who'd swooped in during Dad's final months and poisoned him against his loving wife. According to their version of events, Linda had been a devoted caregiver who'd sacrificed everything to take care of her dying husband, and I'd convinced him to cut her out purely out of greed. It was complete fiction, but it sounded good on paper. My lawyer was this woman named Janet, who specialized in estate litigation. She was in her 50s, no nonsense, and when I first met with her, she asked me point blank if there was any truth to Linda's claims. "Zero," I said. "But I have something better than just my word." That's when I told her about the recordings. Janet's eyes lit up like I'd just handed her a winning lottery ticket. "You recorded her abusing your father?" "Hours of it," I confirmed. "Time-stamped, backed up, properly stored. Plus, I have text messages, emails, and medical records that corroborate everything." "This changes everything," Janet said. "Not only does it defend against her claim, but we can countersue for elder abuse. What she did to your father was illegal. So that's exactly what we did. We filed a countersuit alleging elder abuse, emotional distress, and a bunch of other legal terms that basically added up to Linda had abused my dying father, and now she wanted to profit from it. The case took 8 months to get to court. During that time, Linda kept up the Grieving Widow Act on social media, posted old pictures of her and Dad looking happy, wrote long captions about how much she missed him, how unfair it was that his son was trying to take everything from her. Some people who didn't know the real story felt bad for her, but anyone who'd actually been around during Dad's illness stayed quiet. They'd seen glimpses of how Linda really was, even if they didn't know the full extent. Those 8 months were brutal in their own way. Linda's lawyer kept filing motions, trying to delay the trial, trying to get the recordings thrown out. He argued that I'd invaded Linda's privacy by recording her, that the recordings were obtained illegally, that they should be inadmissible. But Janet shot down every single motion with case law and precedent. One-party consent is one-party consent. I was present for every conversation I recorded. It was all legal. Linda also tried the public opinion route. She did an interview with a local news station about how her stepson was suing her and trying to take everything his father had left her, made herself sound like the victim of a greedy, ungrateful child who couldn't accept that his father had remarried. The news segment was garbage, totally one-sided, didn't include any of the actual facts about the abuse or why Dad had cut her out of the will. I could have gone on TV to defend myself, but Janet advised against it. "Don't fight this battle in the media," she said. "Fight it in court where the evidence speaks for itself." So I kept quiet publicly while Linda ran her mouth, knowing that once we got to trial, the truth would come out. During those months, I also spent time organizing all the evidence we had. The recordings were the centerpiece, but we had other stuff too. Text messages from Linda to her friends complaining about having to take care of Dad, emails where she'd made plans to go out of town and ask neighbors to check on him instead of being there herself. Credit card statements showing she'd spent money on spa days and shopping trips while claiming she couldn't afford to hire help for Dad. We had testimony lined up from Dad's home health aide, who'd witnessed some of Linda's behavior during her shifts. The aide had kept detailed notes about times when Linda had been neglectful or cruel, thinking she might need them someday. Turns out she was right. We also had neighbors who'd heard Linda and Dad arguing through the windows, who'd seen Linda leave for hours while Dad was clearly struggling. Not everyone wanted to get involved. People hate family drama, but enough of them agreed to testify if needed that we had a solid backup plan even without the recordings. The recordings were everything, though. The most damning evidence. No matter what Linda said, no matter how convincing her testimony was, those recordings told the real story in her own voice. You can't argue with that. The trial itself was only 3 days, but they were the longest 3 days of my life. Linda's lawyer went first, building his case that Dad had been mentally incompetent and that I'd manipulated him. He brought in witnesses, some of Linda's friends who testified that Dad had seemed confused when they visited. Except their visits had been months apart, and confusion from pain medication isn't the same thing as being mentally incompetent to make legal decisions. Janet tore their testimonies apart on cross-examination, got them to admit they weren't medical professionals, and had no idea what they were actually observing. Linda herself testified for almost 4 hours. She cried on the stand, talked about how much she'd loved my dad, how hard she'd worked to take care of him, how devastated she was that he'd cut her out of the will. She was convincing, I'll give her that. A couple people in the jury box looked sympathetic. She painted this picture of herself as the devoted wife who'd given up everything to care for her dying husband. Talked about how she'd worked full-time to keep their health insurance while also being his primary caregiver. How she'd helped him with medications, driven him to appointments, cooked his meals, cleaned up after him when he was too weak to do it himself. Made it sound like she was a saint who'd sacrificed her whole life for Dad. And the thing is, some of what she said was technically true. She did work full-time. She did take him to some appointments. She did cook sometimes. But she left out all the abuse, all the neglect, all the times she made him feel like garbage for being sick. It was a masterclass in selective truth-telling. Her lawyer asked her about the will, and she broke down crying again. "I don't understand why he would do this to me," she sobbed. "We were married for 9 years. I took care of him when he was at his worst, and then he just cut me out completely? It doesn't make sense unless someone convinced him I didn't deserve anything." She looked right at me when she said that last part. The implication was clear. I'd manipulated Dad into cutting her out. Her lawyer played it up, asking her if there had been any tension between her and me. She said yes, that I'd always resented her for marrying my father, that I'd been hostile toward her from the beginning, which was complete nonsense. I'd been polite to her for years, even when I didn't particularly like her. It wasn't until I saw how she treated Dad during his illness that I turned against her. Then Linda's lawyer brought up the fact that I'd moved back home during Dad's final months. Tried to make it sound suspicious, like I'd swooped in specifically to isolate Dad from Linda and turn him against her. Never mind that I moved back to help take care of Dad because Linda was being neglectful. Never mind that Dad had actually seemed relieved to have me there. The whole testimony was infuriating to sit through. Watching Linda play the victim, watching her twist everything to make herself look innocent, watching the jury buy into her performance. It took everything in me to stay calm and quiet in my seat. Then it was our turn. Janet called Dad's oncologist first. Dr. Reynolds testified that Dad had been mentally sharp throughout his entire treatment, that they'd had detailed conversations about treatment options and end-of-life planning, that Dad had been fully capable of making complex medical decisions right up until his final week of life. Then she called Dad's primary care physician, who said the same thing. Then a neurologist who'd evaluated Dad specifically to assess his mental state when the will was changed. All 3 doctors said the same thing. Dad's mind had been perfectly fine. The cancer hadn't spread to his brain. The medications caused some temporary confusion sometimes, but nothing that affected his overall cognitive function or decision-making ability. Linda's lawyer tried to poke holes in their testimonies, but you can't really argue with medical experts who'd been documenting their findings for months. Then, Janet said the words I'd been waiting for. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence recordings made by the plaintiff of the defendant's treatment of the deceased. Linda's face went absolutely pale. Her lawyer objected immediately, arguing that the recordings were made without Linda's knowledge and therefore shouldn't be admissible. But we were in a one-party consent state, meaning I only needed my own consent to record conversations I was part of, or that happened in common areas of a house I was living in. The judge allowed it. Janet had prepared a compilation, the greatest hits of Linda's abuse, edited down to about 45 minutes. We'd included timestamps, context for each clip, and transcripts for the jury to follow along. The first recording started playing. Linda's voice came through the courtroom speakers, sharp and angry. I'm so sick of this. You're not even trying to get better. You just want to lie there and make me do everything. Dad's voice, weak and tired. I'm sorry. The medication makes me dizzy. I just need help getting to the... You always need something. I can't even go out with my friends without you calling me every 5 minutes. Do you know how pathetic that is? The courtroom was dead silent except for the recording. I watched the jury's faces change as they listened, watched Linda in her chair, staring straight ahead, not moving. The recordings kept playing, clip after clip of Linda, berating Dad, refusing to help him, mocking him for being sick. The worst one was near the end, Linda screaming at Dad that she couldn't wait for him to die so she could finally live her life again. When that one played, one of the jury members actually gasped out loud. By the time the compilation ended, several people in the courtroom were crying. Linda was still sitting perfectly still, her face completely blank. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But Janet wasn't done. She called me to the stand. I testified about what it was like watching Linda abuse my father, about how I'd tried to get him to leave her, but he was too sick and too tired to fight anymore, about how Dad had changed his will specifically because he didn't want Linda to profit from treating him horribly. I kept my composure the whole time, didn't get emotional, didn't exaggerate, just stated facts. Janet had coached me well. Stick to what happened, don't editorialize, let the recordings speak for themselves. Linda's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to suggest I was lying or that I'd somehow doctored the recordings. But forensic audio analysis had already confirmed the recordings were authentic and unedited. He tried to suggest I had an ulterior motive for recording Linda, that I was trying to frame her to get the inheritance. But that didn't make sense. Dad had already changed his will before I started recording. The recordings were made after that fact, purely to document abuse. The lawyer was grasping at straws and everyone in the courtroom could see it. After I stepped down, Janet called her final witness, a social worker who specialized in elder abuse. The social worker testified about the patterns of abuse evident in the recordings, how they matched classic signs of elder abuse, how Linda's behavior had likely caused Dad significant emotional distress during the final months of his life. Then, Janet rested our case. Deliberation took less than 3 hours. The jury came back with their verdict. Linda's claim that Dad was mentally incompetent was rejected. The will would stand as written. Everything went to me. But that wasn't all. The judge had been listening to those recordings too. And after the verdict was read, she did something I wasn't expecting. She asked to speak with the attorneys at the bench. After a hushed conversation, she made an announcement. Based on evidence presented in this trial, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential prosecution of elder abuse charges under state law. Additionally, I am recommending the State Board of Nursing investigate Ms. Patterson's conduct to determine if disciplinary action is warranted regarding her nursing license. Linda's face went from pale to gray. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge shut him down. The evidence of abuse was right there, recorded and undeniable. The DA would decide whether to file criminal charges, and the nursing board would decide whether she should keep her license. The judge wasn't messing around. Court was adjourned. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Janet was grinning. That was better than I could have hoped for, she said. The judge basically did half our work for us. Linda tried to approach me in the hallway, but her lawyer pulled her away. Smart move, because I had nothing to say to her anyway. 2 weeks later, the DA filed formal charges against Linda, 1 count of elder abuse and 1 count of emotional abuse of a vulnerable adult. Both were felonies. Her nursing license was immediately suspended pending the investigation by the state board. Linda tried to fight the charges, but with the recordings, there wasn't much to fight. Her lawyer eventually convinced her to take a plea deal. She pled guilty to one count of elder abuse in exchange for the other charge being dropped. She was sentenced to 18 months in jail with 3 years probation after release. The nursing board held their hearing while she was awaiting sentencing. They reviewed the recordings, heard testimony from other healthcare professionals about how her behavior violated every ethical standard in the nursing profession, and permanently revoked her license. She'd never work as a nurse again. Linda ended up serving 14 months of her sentence, got out early for good behavior. By the time she was released, she'd lost everything: her career, her reputation, her freedom. She tried reaching out to me once through a mutual acquaintance, claiming she wanted to apologize and make amends. I didn't respond. There was nothing she could say that would make what she did okay. She'd abused my father when he was at his weakest, made his final months miserable when she could have made them bearable, and then tried to profit from his death by stealing the inheritance he'd specifically left to me. The mutual acquaintance kept pushing, though. Said Linda was really struggling, that she was genuinely sorry and wanted a chance to explain herself. I finally agreed to meet her, not because I thought it would change anything, but because I wanted this person to stop bothering me. We met at a coffee shop. Linda looked rough, older, tired, defeated. Prison had not been kind to her. She apologized, said the stress of caregiving had made her act in ways she wasn't proud of. Classic excuse: blame the circumstances instead of taking real responsibility. When she was done, I asked, "Did you come here hoping I'd give you some of the inheritance money?" The way her face changed told me everything. She absolutely had. The whole apology was just a prelude to asking for money. She started talking about living in a studio apartment, working minimum wage, barely affording rent. I told her the truth. You had 9 years to be kind to my dad. You chose to be cruel instead. Every bad thing that happened to you was a direct result of choices you made. I don't owe you anything. Then I left. Haven't heard from her since. As for the inheritance, I used part of it to pay off my student loans and buy a house. Put most of the rest in investments. Kept Dad's truck because it reminded me of him. Donated his tools to a trade school program that helps kids learn construction skills. Dad would have liked that. The house I bought is actually perfect for me. 3 bedrooms, decent yard, quiet neighborhood. Close enough to visit Dad's grave, but far enough to feel like a fresh start. I started a garden like Dad always had. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, herbs. Something about getting my hands dirty and growing food felt like honoring his memory. The life insurance money, $400,000, gave me financial security for the first time in my life. After taxes and expenses, I put most of it into investments for retirement. It was surreal going from living paycheck to suddenly being able to breathe, to make decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what I could afford. The house I grew up in, I sold it. Couldn't stand to be there anymore after everything that happened. Too many bad memories of watching Linda mistreat Dad. Used the money from that sale to set up a scholarship fund at my old high school for kids who'd lost a parent. Named it after my dad. I think about Dad a lot. Wish things had been different. That he'd left Linda when the abuse started. That he'd spent his final months somewhere peaceful instead of in a toxic marriage. But he made his choices, and I respect that. At least he had the last word by making sure Linda didn't get to profit from treating him like garbage. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Linda. Her going to jail, losing her career, all of it. The answer is no, not even a little bit. She made her choices too. She chose to abuse a dying man. She chose to file a lawsuit trying to steal his money. She could have been kind. She could have been decent. She chose not to be. And choices have consequences. The whole experience taught me something important. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. My dad deserved better than Linda. He deserved someone who would hold his hand and make him feel safe at the end. Not someone who made him feel like a burden. At least I was there for him. At least he knew I loved him. At least he got to make sure Linda didn't win. And honestly, that's enough. These days, I'm doing okay. Work is good, I've got a nice place, and I'm finally at peace with everything that happened. I visit Dad's grave every couple months. Tell him about what's going on in my life. Sometimes I bring him a coffee from his favorite place. Set it on his headstone like we're just hanging out. I like to think he'd be proud of how everything turned out. Not the part about Linda going to jail. Dad wasn't vindictive like that. But the part where I stood up for him, where I made sure his final wishes were respected, where I didn't let someone take advantage of his memory. Yeah, I think he'd be proud of that. Linda is out of jail now, living somewhere on the other side of the state. Last I heard, she's working retail, which is about the only job she can get with a felony conviction and no nursing license. Me? I'm doing fine. Got my house, got dad's truck in the garage, got a decent life that doesn't involve constant family drama. The inheritance gave me a fresh start, and I took it. About a month after Linda got out of prison, she showed up at my house. Just appeared on my doorstep one Saturday morning, like that was a normal thing to do. I opened the door and there she was, looking rough but with that fake apologetic expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said. "No, we don't," I replied, and started to close the door. She put her foot in the doorway. "Please, just 5 minutes. I made a mistake coming after you legally. I was grieving and not thinking straight. But we're still family, and I think if we could just move your foot or I'm calling the police." She moved it, but she kept talking through the closing door. "I'm struggling. I lost everything. You got everything. Don't you think your dad would have wanted you to help me?" I opened the door back up just enough to look her in the eye. "Dad left you nothing on purpose. That was his choice, not mine. And showing up at my house after you tried to steal my inheritance and frame me in court, that's harassment. Leave." She tried one more angle. "I have a lawyer looking into whether the recordings were actually legal. One-party consent has exceptions and—" "Good luck with that," I said. "Your last lawyer already tried that argument and lost. Now get off my property." I closed the door. She stood there for another minute before finally leaving. I watched through the window to make sure she actually drove away, then called my lawyer Janet to document the incident. She told me to file a restraining order if Linda showed up again. Thankfully, she hasn't. 2 months later, I got a call from Dad's old oncologist, Dr. Reynolds. Turns out Linda had contacted the hospital claiming there were errors in Dad's medical records regarding his mental state. She was trying to get the doctors to change their documentation retroactively, make it look like Dad had been more confused than they'd originally noted. Dr. Reynolds called me as a courtesy to let me know what Linda was trying to do. "I've documented her request and reported it to hospital administration," he said. "This is attempted medical records fraud. I thought you should know she's still trying to fight this." "Can she actually succeed?" I asked. "Not a chance," he said. "Medical records are legal documents. We can't and won't falsify them, but it shows she hasn't accepted reality yet." The hospital ended up banning Linda from the premises for attempting to tamper with records. Added another black mark to her already destroyed reputation. About 6 months after the trial, I got contacted by a woman named Rebecca, who'd been one of Linda's co-workers at the hospital. She'd followed the trial in the news and wanted to meet with me. Said she had information I might want to know. We met at a restaurant. Rebecca told me that Linda had been written up multiple times at work for being rough with patients, particularly elderly ones. Nothing severe enough to lose her license over, but enough that management had been watching her closely. After the trial and the recordings came out, 3 former patients had filed complaints about Linda's treatment of them during their hospital stays. "I always knew something was off about her," Rebecca said. "The way she'd talk about patients when they weren't around, like they were burdens instead of people. But I never thought she'd be that bad at home with her own husband." The hospital had conducted an internal investigation after Linda's nursing license was revoked. Turns out there were more complaints than Rebecca even knew about, spanning years. Linda had been skating by, getting warnings, but never quite crossing the line into losing her job, until the trial exposed who she really was. "I wanted you to know your dad wasn't the only one," Rebecca said. "She had a pattern. You just happened to be the one who caught her and did something about it." That information actually helped. Knowing it wasn't personal, that Linda was just a bad person who treated everyone poorly, made it easier to accept what had happened. The house I grew up in took 8 months to sell. Real estate market was slow, and the fact that someone had died there didn't help. I sold it for less than market value just to be done with it. Used the money to set up a scholarship fund for kids who'd lost a parent. $2,000 per year to local high school seniors. The fund is named after Dad. Linda tried to show up to one of the scholarship ceremonies. I saw her in the back of the auditorium right before it started. Had security remove her before the program began. She went quietly, but the look she gave me was pure hatred. That was the last time I saw her in person. About a year ago, I heard she'd moved out of state. Probably couldn't handle living where everyone knew what she'd done. I also heard she tried to write a book about her wrongful conviction. Shopped it around to publishers, but nobody would touch it. Turns out when your case includes recorded evidence of you abusing an elderly cancer patient, publishers don't see you as sympathetic. These days, I barely think about Linda unless something reminds me of the trial. I'm too busy living my life. I've been seeing someone for about 6 months now. Haven't told her the full story yet, but I will eventually. I visit Dad's grave every few months. Bring him a coffee, pull any weeds, tell him about my life. The inheritance money is invested and growing. By the time I retire, it should be worth a substantial amount. I got a letter from the DA's office last month. Linda's probation ends next year. They wanted to know if I had concerns about her contacting me. I told them about her showing up at my house and the medical records fraud. They noted it in her file. I don't think she'll bother me again, though. She tried every angle and none of it worked. Eventually, even Linda has to accept that she lost. And that's fine with me. She's not my problem anymore. She made her choices, faced the consequences, and now she gets to live with them. I made my choices too. Stood up for my dad, protected his final wishes, made sure justice was served. Fair trade if you ask me. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories.